Okay, welcome back to another episode of Browns Bytes. That's about the most professional intro you're going to get from me, so let's eat that up. Anyway, we're recording on a Monday. We're done with OTAs. We're about to get ready for minicamp this week before the Browns go on summer vacation. Keeping in mind that the Browns have one less week than everybody else now, other than the Jets, because they'll come back a week earlier than everybody because of the Hall of Fame game. So this is getting down to it, the last bit of sort of football stuff like that we can see before we get to training camp. So with that, and football is super important and all that, and we love it and everything else, but nothing's quite as important, or the molding of a human as a person growing up and everything else, quite like Little League Baseball, especially at 7 years old, when they may or may not still keep score at this point, in part for the reasons that we may discuss for this reason. But this was an epic matchup between two teams that the kids will remember forever. I certainly remember maybe two things from my Little League time at that age, and they had nothing to do with winning or losing. But anyway, Bree, by all means, this is a big moment for everyone in that community. So lay it out for us.
I'm chuckling right now. So let me just set the scene for you, Pete, because I've obviously experienced youth sports now for a couple of years, and I obviously grew up playing them, but I would say it's obviously been 30 years since I participated in youth sports that were not part of my school, and things are very, very competitive, and it just seems more aggressive overall. And I know you're a coach. You coach high school football. So
So this is right in my wheelhouse, because
yeah.
we have to deal with this.
Yes. So my daughter plays 8U softball, and my son is in 8U baseball. And my daughter had just made the cutoff for 8U based on her birthday. And I wanted her to have one more year of experience before she moves up to fast pitch softball or kid pitch. Mm-hmm. So both leagues right now are coach pitch, which if you have kids in baseball or softball and you are listening, you probably know coach pitch versus kid pitch. Kid pitch, obviously, could get a little bit wild just based on younger kids pitching and getting hit by the ball, or they could be very long games.
Just that would be my word for it. Endless.
Yes,
would be
exactly.
the descriptor for very young kid pitch.
So we're not there yet. However, in the league that my kids are in, they're both playing for the same division essentially. The rules are very different. So and one could argue that girls versus boys, of course, there's different rules because they're being viewed differently, different ability levels, even though they're the same age. My daughter, it's not 3 strikes and you're out. They get a pitch count. So there are a certain number of pitches allotted for each batter. If they swing 3 times and miss, they still get their number of allotted pitches. Mm-hmm. There are no walks in either league. Obviously, it's a coach pitching. In baseball, 8U, it's 3 strikes and you're out. So it's, foul ball counts as a strike.
Toughen them up. That's
swinging and miss counts as there's no pitch count. So that's one big difference. The other big difference is in softball, the girls cannot advance on an overthrow to first base. So obviously in the field, these are 5, in some cases, 6, 7, 8-year-olds playing, and their throws are not on target to first base. The first baseman oftentimes can barely catch the ball. So in softball, typically the runner just rounds the base. They're not looking to advance. In baseball, it is a free-for-all. My son's league can advance on an overthrow. I have seen triples on a hit to the pitcher, which Maddox got last week. He was pumped about his triple. And I was like, let me just take you down a minute. I was like, you hit it to the pitcher. You got a triple. By overthrows. But regardless, he was very excited
Josh
about
Naylor
his
has
triple.
nothing on Maddox. That 4-for-5 game, that's crap.
So anyway, to set the scene of what happened on, I think this was Thursday night that I tweeted this. My kids actually played at the same time at the same fields. They were back-to-back fields. So I parked myself in the middle, and I was able to watch my daughter on one field and my son on the other field by just turning around, which was great. Very efficient.
Is that one of those 4-field setups where, they've got them all the backstops are all pointed at each other?
Not quite. That would be even more ideal. I was sitting behind the home plate for my daughter's team, and I was able to see my son on the other field. Like I was farther away. So my son was actually playing one of the other teams from like the same school. There's 4 teams. They had to have 4 teams based on the number of kids that went out. And my son's team is very inexperienced. A lot of kids that have never played before. We have some 5-year-olds on the team, very just young. The team they were playing against had played together last year. So the coach picked all of his players that he had known, very experienced. I mean, there are kids hitting the ball in the outfield past the outfielders' heads, just to let everyone know. I was watching my daughter play, and all of the coaches are extremely positive, very encouraging. Anytime a player makes a play and they throw it to first base, even if they don't get the out, it is reinforcing that that was the right play, that was the right idea, that was the right throw, good try, like do it again. When I turn around and watch the baseball team, it is like cutthroat out for blood. The team that we were playing was rounding first before the ball was even thrown to first base. They were advancing on to second base and running past third base multiple times, because there's another rule where on overthrows, even from like the outfield throwing it into second base, if the runner is halfway through, they can advance. If they're not halfway through, because the fielders have to like run the ball into the pitcher's mound to like stop the play to be dead. So like, again, a lot of our kids are very inexperienced, but they were like getting the overthrows and then running into the infield with their hands up. And this was happening multiple times. And the other team was sending their players, like they were sending them on like every throw because they knew our team wasn't going to catch it. So they kept scoring runs. And I looked over at one point, my husband helps coach, and he's like yelling at the other coach, like, send him back. And I was like, oh no.
Oh no.
Like my husband was getting into it with the other coaches. And, I will say my husband's very patient. He's very much like it's 8U baseball, but I think his tipping off point was that team was playing a very different rule book than any other team that we had played all year. So he was very confused as to why they were approaching it that way. And so then they had to have this conference on the field. I don't know. It was like this whole big thing, and it was very competitive, and I am very competitive. So I have a really hard time staying even keeled because I really want my team to win. And I really, and I really, this is so stupid, but it just like gets my blood boiling when other teams are so cutthroat and like, we're not teaching them how to actually play the sport, because you want your kids to throw it to first, even if they can't catch it.
Right.
But it feels like now the fielders are hesitant to even make the play or the throw because they don't want the other runners to advance. Like what are we really teaching them? So anyway, the experience of being a softball mom and a baseball mom is very different. The whole outcome, the whole attitude, everything about it. I much prefer my child's softball team and the positive learning experience, the encouragement, the abilities of the players. Like they have all improved. So, they're getting better regardless. And their coaching is very different. And the teams they play against are also very encouraging. Like it's a very positive environment. And baseball has been an up and down experience.
Well, there's a fine line between playing to win and running up the score.
Yes.
And that's the line where you go from rational adult understanding that the other team's simply better than your team and wanting to kill them because they're running up the score on your team. And you just want one, so your kids to have a good experience, and 2, you want to kill them because they are just, it's no longer in doubt what's going to happen. And now they're just doing it to do it.
Well, and I think the other thing was, and I do know that there are some people that listen to this show that are from my hometown. And what bothered me the most was these were teams that were eventually like, they're going to play together. These kids are going to play together. These parents are going to be parenting together, and everyone's going to be joining one team eventually. So I was confused why the other team, like it wasn't more of a, hey, we need everyone to succeed. We want all of these kids to succeed because eventually like we're all going to be playing together as we continue to move up in age divisions. So that's what really threw me. And then, I know you're going to have different skill levels overall based on, there are kids that play year round. There are kids that play travel ball. There are kids that take lessons. So the skill level is going to vary like pretty extreme, but I don't know if I like the idea of coaches stacking their team year to year. Maybe spread it out a little bit. But yeah, my son Maddox is very competitive. He knew that they
Can't
were
imagine
losing.
where he would get that from.
He he left and he was like, we got smoked. It was 20-5 tonight. So he ended up rebounding. Saturday, we played in the 90-degree heat at 3 p.m. and his team smoked the team they were playing. So he left that game and he said, we smoked that team. And I was like, well, you went from getting smoked to doing the smoking. So I guess this was a very roller coaster of an experience these last couple of days.
The idea that people are paying money for a travel ball at 7 and 8 is insane to me, but because it's a lucrative venture to get into. But at that age, it's like some kids are just slightly bigger and a little more coordinated at that point, and they're going to win for the time being, which is fine.
Exactly. We talked about this with football. Like you said, you brought up a really good point to me. You have kids at this age, even like as they get to 9, 10, 11, that they might be the biggest on the team right now. And then 5 years from now,
will look nothing like it. You won't, they will be unrecognizable.
Yeah.
In that. And, Maddox is clearly on the path to being like 6'3", 220, but
I don't know about that.
He's 15. No, it's funny. What's funny about youth sports is, where I coach, we have feeder systems, obviously, because it's a community, we're not multiple high schools, one high school for this town. And so there's a couple of youth programs, they're trying to feed all the way up to the high school, which is great. But I had heard, they get so excited about the youth talent they have. And I heard we always laughed about this, that we heard about the greatest sixth grade team in history. And they were the greatest sixth grade team in history until they lost 2 games. And then they weren't the greatest sixth grade team in history anymore. So it's just like, look, youth sports are great. I played youth sports, but as I said, especially at 7 and 8, and even 9 and 10 a little bit. Certainly I have a few memories, but ultimately, I just either remember I enjoyed doing it or I didn't enjoy doing it, and that's ultimately, if you're coaching it or you're an onlooker of it, that's really what you should focus on. Because if you make it a crappy time, they're going to hate it and not want to do it, and that's. So I love all these stories, and I saw that video clip over the weekend of some Virginia youth soccer brawl.
Gosh,
that was just like out of control. Anyway, that stuff makes me happy. I'm glad that Maddox got to crush it. Given that he not only is doing well in baseball, but got to do the Deion Sanders experience of killing it at the end of his flag football season, and then going into a 5-for-5 little league baseball game, living the dream at that age. Now, I don't know if I'll remember it 2 weeks from now, but it doesn't get much better than that for a kid that age. Anyway, the Browns, nominally what this podcast is about. This past week, we're a little late because schedules just got out of whack, and Bree is currently trying to save the world.
Always.
We had our second set of press conferences with players, and it's largely players that are new to the team. They did talk to Denzel Ward, which is interesting, but they talked to Marquise Goodwin, and now with Juan Thornhill, who are, players who are like actively trying to steal our hearts on this podcast. Marquise Goodwin, for a guy who might be wide receiver 5 or wide receiver 6, is arguably the most captivating man on this team. And I don't even know how long his press conference was. Like, normally they sort of cut those things down. I think he was so good that the media person who's like supposed to get him out just sort of let him go. He went on all kinds of stuff about like his life, and he talked all about himself. And what's interesting is like he talked about all these inspiring things in his past life. He didn't even scratch the surface of the stuff he's been through. Obviously, he talked about he's the oldest of 12, and the youngest is 13. And he's had siblings with, developmental issues and some things like that. And like talking about, well, we should preface this by this whole conversation started with Tony Grossi asking the rudest question of all time by asking the first question. I don't even know if he introduced himself beforehand, but he just said straight up to a professional track athlete, how much speed have you lost since your prime? Which is so loaded on multiple levels because one, it suggests he's out of his prime, and two, it suggests he's slow. Part of me was waiting for my just to hear a thwap of him punching Grossi in the face, but he handled it like a professional and was just like, I'm still in my prime. I haven't lost a step. And then people were sort of asking about like how, how why he's still as passionate as he is, why does he work so hard? And he went into this whole thing about like, one, he's a professional in two sports, and I don't think he does professional track anymore, but he's done it at various points and goes from professional football in the regular to professional football season to track season with no stop in between. And was just like, yeah, time flies because I'm doing all this stuff, which is part of why he's been able to do this. And then he was asked like, why are you able to do this? And he like talked about his sister who was spina bifida,
cerebral palsy,
who he's really good at talking, by the way. He's a good storyteller and like setting it up. But he was like talking about how like hearing her cry, she just wishes she could put her feet on the ground and all this other stuff. And basically saying, I have no excuse not to work hard ever.
Yeah. He's talked about how much of a motivating factor that was for him, even at a younger age, just talk about putting things into perspective.
And then he turned and he went to the little cocky route. And this is why I enjoyed Marquise Goodwin. He's like, how'd you know you were fast? It's like, I raced anybody. I raced people in the neighborhood. And then it immediately turned to, I raced for money. Yeah. Which is just awesome. Baller move to be like, I'll race anybody for money. And so he was awesome. And he, we've talked about this on the podcast. We said all along that like, you don't have to like Deshaun Watson, the person. He is a draw for people. And look, they share the same agent, which is part of it. But Marquise Goodwin said straight up, I wanted to play with Deshaun Watson. That's why I'm here. And that gave you that showed you what that's like, that what that does for him. He's playing on a basically nothing contract, but he wanted to play with Watson, and it worked out on that particular day. He had multiple highlight catches before he did his press conference, which is great. But the part that this is the part that gets lost. And I didn't remember this. And when I showed Bree, she's all like, oh yeah, that was him. Marquise Goodwin and his wife in 2017, she was pregnant and she lost the pregnancy, had to deliver at 20 weeks. And the child did not survive. And within 20 hours, he's on the football field and he's scoring a touchdown. And if you see I recommend looking up the video because he goes in the end zone. It's like an 82-yard touchdown and he just collapses. Like he's just overcome with everything that went into this because of everything that he just transpired the night before. It's like, imagine, it's a great story. The 2021 Browns draft is a great story in part because Andrew Berry was there to see Britain deliver, I think it was their second child at that point. And then it was great. And everybody's like, this super excited. He goes and drafts Greg Newsome and JOK. And it's like, he can be there for the birth of his child and still have a great draft. What's your excuse? And Marquise Goodwin is the exact opposite in the expense. He goes through this just gut wrenching, heartbreaking situation and has a great moment. It doesn't stop there. 2 years later, she's pregnant with twins and has to give birth at 19 weeks. And one, I think, suffocated in the birth canal. And then the other was delivered and was alive for 30 minutes before passing away. So with people not really doing enough research, it would have been interesting to just sort of ask him. Obviously, he talked about with the sister with cerebral palsy, but he is a remarkably positive individual. And I'd be curious to ask him, how does he do that? Because everything he's been through, you could easily see where something like all these, he's 33, I think now, still, old by sports, standards, but he's a young guy that he's been able to deal with all this heartbreak and is super positive, seems to be well adjusted in how he operates.
Yeah. First of all, I thought his entire press conference was captivating, I think is the right word to describe it. As you mentioned,
well, it was yours. I stole it.
No, well, outside of the first question that I was laughing because he had to defend his speed and his athleticism and his elite status. And I liked how he talked about his being an Olympian, and the accomplishment that takes. And
went into detail on, he was very invested in explaining how long.
Yeah. Well, his training, I mean, he's exactly right. Like he said he does a lot of track workouts and training, and he helps coach a college still, and is very involved in that. And he was a long jumper specifically, which he talked about. I was a long jumper in high school.
Okay, here we go.
I wasn't great. I was not that good. It's really, really hard. And so I liked how he explained how he even trained for that, because it's speed plus jumping. And you think about those attributes of how you become that successful in track and field, and then how that translates on the football field. Obviously, those are skills that are still being used on the football field. And I just want to say, I know he hasn't played a single down, with this team outside of what they've been practicing in OTAs, but in my opinion, he right now is as advertised what I think we all thought Anthony Schwartz was going to be. The track star who was going to translate into a really good wide receiver. Right now, Marquise Goodwin, to me, has already kind of proven that on the football field. And I think that's what our hope is, that this will translate as we start and embark the season. And I also think, just in listening to him talk, this is kind of a prove it year for him too, to showcase what he still has left in the tank per se. And he's utilizing this season as a way to continue to have a career in this league. And with everything that he talked about in his personal life, it seems very important for him to continue to go down this path of playing professional football. And by all means, he obviously puts in the work. He understands what it takes. He trains very well. I'm sure that he eats very well. He takes very good care of his body. I know football is obviously a much more physical sport in terms of the hits that they take than basketball. But you look at some of the NBA athletes that have been able to extend their careers, I feel like he is looking at that saying, well, I'm going to be able to do the same thing as well. And I'm going to continue to be in this league professionally. So I would honestly read a book if he wrote it. He has so many incredible stories to talk about. Obviously, all the things that have impacted him personally, again, like just understanding how he grew up, his mindset, his siblings, and what their life has looked like, what it looks like now, his losses with his wife that they suffered. I mean, just tremendous, tremendous grief to carry around, and getting inside his mental, how he handles that emotionally and mentally, I think would be really, really interesting to learn about.
Yeah. So long jump, in the way he taught, like his explanation with long jump is like the layman's way of explaining why analytics is important in terms of athleticism. Because long jump is just the ultimate measure of explosion. You are going really, really fast, and then you are jumping as far as you can. And like when we get into draft season and the combine and all these stuff, we want to see, obviously they don't do a long jump, but they measure how fast you can run, and they measure how far you can jump, as well as how high you can jump. Like all these things to measure explosion. Marquise Goodwin has exceptional explosion. In fact, he got set up for the perfect question to humble brag. They asked, do you ever win a state title or anything in long jump? He goes, yeah, I've got the national record at that high school. I was like, yeah, you and Marquise Goodwin and Bree can relate, both Hoff-Waffs at their respective schools. But I that's where, like, when people go, oh, you get the grossy analytics and they want to roll their eyes. I think the way Marquise Goodwin sort of explains it is really valuable in sort of understanding why that stuff matters. And he related it into sort of stopping and starting in terms of cuts and being able to transfer energy in your body and shift your power. But yeah, look, this is a guy who could, if he has a great season, will have 400 yards receiving. Like, that's a good year for him. And he may cut the top off of defense a couple times, but that may be all he does. And that, we may not hear from Marquise Goodwin a whole lot this season, but to me, and I'm sure Bree agrees with me on this, this is sort of why we like sports. is people like Marquise Goodwin make sports fun because they are seemingly, and we don't know them well enough, but seemingly really good people who have inspiring stories that sort of draw you in, the way that I always felt like the 2020 Browns season felt, where it felt like we were all in with this group of players that we really, really liked, as opposed to 2019 season, where we hated everyone on the team, even though some of the same players were on both teams. But yeah, Marquise Goodwin, Juan Thornhill, these are guys that sort of, they make it more fun. Like it's not, you don't want to be in a situation. Unfortunately, the Browns are somewhat in this situation a little bit with Deshaun Watson, and we don't need to litigate this, but like, you don't want to have to avoid reading or listen, hearing about players on your team and just shut up and get to Sunday and hopefully they win. Players like Marquise Goodwin sort of allow you to sort of learn about me and understand why you're excited about this. And like, for somebody like Bree, who's into this, can like say to her kids and be like, can tell them the story of this player and be like really happy about it. And her kids can be like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty cool or whatever. And like, that's the stuff you want sports to be. So I enjoyed that. I really like Marquise Goodwin. And like I said, we may not hear from him again all year because he's not a guy who's going to get a ton of snaps, but fascinating guy. And I agree. I hope he does do something where he gets his thoughts down in something, whether he does a podcast, writes a book, whatever. But then again, I don't know if he has enough time in the day, given the amount of things he's trying to do with his life. But anyway, the overwhelming story that's sort of taken over for the Browns, and not just the Browns, but a number of teams, was the release of wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Arizona Cardinals. There was talk that the Cardinals they would have liked to have traded him. They wanted to get something for him, but two things happened. One, the calendar. The Cardinals didn't want to carry his cap space, the dead cap he would incur, onto their 2024 cap. They want the player they will be drafting with what it could be the top overall pick of that draft, and will be a quarterback, to have all of the money available to surround that player with talent. They are all in on Caleb Williams and potentially could be Drake May. We'll see what happens. Those are the top two quarterbacks, but they want that money on this year, so they opted to cut him. The other thing that changed was that the Baltimore Ravens signed Odell Beckham for $15 million guaranteed. And the second that happened, DeAndre Hopkins said, whoa, I'm not taking less than that, and refused to consider redoing his deal to be traded for anything less than that. So he just said, I'm not going to do it. You guys can go ahead and cut me. And that's where we are. So DeAndre Hopkins obviously played 3 seasons with the Houston Texans. The same time Deshaun Watson was there. They played 49 total games together. They were a prolific combination. But, I went back and like charted out the top 5 games that those two had together. It's a long time ago. 2018 is, I think, 3 of those games were in. At least one of them was against the Andrew Luck-led Indianapolis Colts. And it doesn't, it's really not that long ago. But just mentioning Andrew Luck playing in the NFL feels like an eternity ago. One of those games, or one of the 2019, I don't think it was in that game, but Jacoby Brissett was the starter for the Indianapolis Colts that year. So it's been a while. So like DeAndre Hopkins, in fact, tomorrow, Tuesday, as we record this, he will be celebrating his 31st birthday. He has gotten slower. He has lost a step. And so the debate, should the Browns try to sign him for what would be a lucrative deal to reunite him and Deshaun Watson? And if they were to do that, almost certainly a corresponding move that would go along with that would be trading Donovan Peoples-Jones. I wrote an article today, or the published today, that compared them, and even I was surprised how similar they really are in just where they win. They both in that 10 to 20 yard range. They're great. That's where they do most of their damage. They're both really good at beating zone. They're both reasonably big receivers. DeAndre Hopkins is a little bit bigger than Donovan Peoples-Jones, but Donovan Peoples-Jones is faster, more explosive than DeAndre Hopkins. So ultimately you're choosing between those two. Obviously part of the conversation is that Donovan Peoples-Jones is in the last year of his contract, of his rookie deal. And do the Browns want to extend him after the season? That could be $10 million average per year. Do they really want to do that, or do they want to let him walk? So for some people, their thought process is, well, they think DeAndre Hopkins is better, and DPJ is going to be gone, so they might as well trade him and get DeAndre Hopkins, thinking it's an upgrade. It's an interesting conversation. Obviously, Deshaun Watson weighed in and at the golf outing and said, of course, we would love to have him here. Although I would have been very surprised if he said, no, I hope he gets hit by a car. I've never seen a player come out and say, no, I don't want player on my team, especially not one that was on his team with him. So I don't know what you take away from that, because here's the other part of that. Like, Mary Kay Cabot loves this idea of DeAndre Hopkins. As her argument is saying that the fact that Deshaun Watson came out and said this means that he really wants DeAndre Hopkins on his team. To me, that may be that may be true. That may be 100% what's happening. But here's the thing: if Deshaun Watson didn't come and address the question and just ignored it entirely, we would be writing about how he didn't address the topic, and that, what does that mean? So I think him being proactive, whether he wants DeAndre Hopkins or not, I think is proactive for the sake of being polite and to be able to set the story a certain way, whether the Browns really want him or not. But I'm curious. I don't know how much you've paid attention to this, as you know, you've been busy in the youth sports world. What are your thoughts on the possibility of adding DeAndre Hopkins?
Yeah, so I feel like this has been now ongoing for a few weeks since his release.
Yes.
And I feel like I know the same amount of information that I knew 2 weeks ago. But obviously a lot of thoughts and opinions happening out there in Twitterverse across multiple teams. And obviously the one that I'm closest to is Browns fandom. And I'm a little bit impartial on this. I agree. I think the appeal to most of the Browns fans is the fact that him and Deshaun played together. And if we do end up getting him, it almost feels like, well, this is going to be amazing. And it's going to change the trajectory of the team because they already have that chemistry and they know each other and yada, yada, yada. Kind of reminds me a little bit of when we traded for Odell. Not that Baker and Odell had played together before, but it was like the appeal of having that guy on our team where we could see all of these things then coming together in the season. I don't know that this feels like something Andrew Berry would do because of the DPJ situation. I feel like DeAndre Hopkins wants a large amount of money.
Has made it very clear that's what he wants. Yes.
Yes. And he also spoke about the fact that he wants to be in a stable organization. He wants to play for a contender. And as much as we are biased as Browns fans and we look at this roster and we say, well, this roster is loaded, we could definitely contend for playoffs and a division and maybe the Super Bowl. DeAndre Hopkins is not viewing the Cleveland Browns that way. I mean, I think his only reason to sign with the Cleveland Browns is Deshaun Watson, and if they are willing to give him a large sum of money. And I just don't think that the Browns are going to do that.
Yeah, I've written on this in multiple ways. I think Hopkins and his agent, and this is the first time in his career he's hired an agent, because up to this point, he was drafted in the first round, and then teams were desperate to give him oodles of money. He didn't need an agent to say yes. He's gotten top of the line deals the whole way until now, where now he wants his money. And to be clear, more power to him. Like, finite career, brutal sport, go get all you can get.
Right.
But I do think that he and his agent, who's based in Cleveland, see the Browns as their best leverage play. The being able, and he's certainly not the first player to do this, but it's a little bit more believable, I think, in some ways, because of Deshaun Watson and because of where the Browns are. And you're having, fans and some media like push the agenda for them by saying, well, the Browns have to do everything possible to make the playoffs this year, or everybody's getting fired, which I suppose is true. But at the same point, do you want your sports team to act desperately to sort of, let's say they start making stupid decisions to get into the playoffs this year, And then now they lose stuff, whether it's the money or players or whatever, because they made this move, and then they don't make the playoffs next year. We're now repeating the cycle where 2020 was great, but then we have to experience 21 and 22, and everybody's mad and wants everybody fired. So now we're putting pressure on it. To your point, I agree. I don't think this is a move Andrew Berry wants to make. And I think he understands better than anybody that Donovan Peoples-Jones at 24 years old is roughly, even if DeAndre Hopkins is slightly better, let's say Hopkins is better. Is he $10 million better? Is he a better fit when Donovan Peoples-Jones is already on the team? Is he a better fit when Donovan Peoples-Jones has done everything the team asks him to do, and they regard him as a model citizen and a great teammate and everything else? And DeAndre Hopkins, and this is reportedly, is a pain in the, I'll just say, DeAndre Hopkins is a pain in the ass. He is. He's a whiner. He doesn't want to practice.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about too. It's almost like in the NBA world, like it's like a rental.
Yes.
You're renting him for the hope to be able to make a playoff run. I don't know if that payoff, to your point, is worth it by adding someone who has that type of attitude. And do we need someone on the team that has that? Like, we want the Amari Coopers and the Nick Chubbs, and like, those are the type of players that we want to have on the team, the ones that want to be here. I know a lot of players are motivated by money and by their contract, but I do not want that to be the situation where he's going to choose the team because of the amount of money. Like, that's fine. Go play somewhere else if money is like the ultimate driving factor. Like, I don't want that. I want someone who wants to be on the team, who wants to play for this team. It feels like the guys and the free agents we brought in this year have that type of attitude, even if contracts and money were a piece of it. Like, it just feels very different from where we've been before.
Yeah, but to the point is, like, he's a pain in the ass, but for, 10 years of his career, he was worth it. Like, he was that dude. Like, you could put up with it. And on some level, you can say to Kevin Stefanski at that point, this is what the money's for. Make it work. And in some ways, that's sort of what some people believe that Zadarius Smith will be. DeAndre Hopkins, his attitude, reportedly, this is from Albert Breer talking to people within the league, who are basically saying his attitude reflects your place in the standings. So if you're winning, things are good. If you're losing, they suck. But even the people who like him say he doesn't want to practice. Even the people who like him say he's kind of a pain in the ass. At this point, I don't think he's worth the pain in the ass for what he's going to give you on the field. That doesn't mean he's not a good player. And again, it would be like if, like, I would argue that Lamar Jackson is a giant pain in the ass, but he's exceptional. Like, the national media loves him, but like in Baltimore, he's been a pain. Like, he doesn't show up to OTAs when they want, and now he's obviously showed up later, but does all these things that like the organization is infuriated by, but he's exceptionally gifted. So you put up with it. Like, that's part of it. DeAndre Hopkins in 2019, worth it. DeAndre Hopkins now, not worth it, which is why Arizona's sort of like, we don't want him. Bill O'Brien, who was his coach at the Houston Texans, even when he was good, was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and potentially cost himself his job by doing it. But when we are constantly talking about, locker room issues, we keep dealing with locker room issues. We don't have a good locker room culture. We have all these issues we want to deal with. We got me first guys, and we don't have enough of a team. We don't have enough leaders. If that is true, and I would argue the offense is better than the defense, as we've talked about, there's more adults in the offense than there are on defense. Do we really want more of those guys? I would think that the Browns don't. And like I said, DPJ is not, like, even if he's not quite the level of Hopkins is, he was good last year. They had the same number of targets. Obviously, Hopkins only played 9 games versus DPJ 17, but DPJ had way more yards on those targets. He had more explosive plays, same number of touchdowns. They both get a good number of first downs and all that. I will freely admit that DeAndre Hopkins is better on contested catches. He's better in the red zone, but DPJ is also more explosive. He's faster. And for a team that wants to be more explosive, who says right out, we want to be faster, It seems like DPJ makes more sense. The other part of this is if DPJ is good, if DPJ is great, and the Browns can't sign him, okay, but at least they have options. They could transition tag him, for example. They could let him walk and get at that point a third round compensatory pick as opposed to whatever they get in trade. But at least they do right by the player in that specific case. The last thing that DPJ does that DeAndre Hopkins does not do is he returns punts, and he returns punts well. He scored a touchdown last year returning punts. He averaged 12.3 yards per turn. Typically, the goal for special teams on punt return is to get 10 yards, get a first down. DPJ is averaging more than that. He helped the Browns win 2 games just with punt returns. The Houston Texans game, we blew open the game with a punt return touchdown, and then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, he had 5 returns for 75 yards. And like the last couple were critical in tying the game, and then I think winning the game. DeAndre Hopkins doesn't play special teams at all. As I said, he doesn't want to practice. His whole thing, and to his credit, he's been able to do it. He shows up on Sundays and he makes plays. DPJ is more going to fit in with your organization. In fact, part of the problem is DPJ never talks. Like, you're just thinking in your head right now, you probably know Nick Chubb's voice better than you know Donovan Peoples-Jones' voice, because they're very similar in how they are. They just don't talk very much. DPJ is very quiet, professional, super smart guy, but he just sort of keeps to himself and doesn't get a lot of attention. There's enough people in the Browns organization that people want to talk to that DPJ is sort of content to do his own thing. But like, part of the thing that's interesting to me is like, Deshaun Watson really likes DeAndre Hopkins, but last year in camp, the guy he seemingly really liked was Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think part of that is because they're so eerily similar. They play a similar style. I think he understands why they're so similar. So I think ultimately, if it's me, and I could be dead wrong on this, but I think the Browns will say, we're going to bet on the 24-year-old DPJ who does everything right, does everything we want. He's going to pay us off, as opposed to the 31-year-old DeAndre Hopkins, who we're hoping can hang on for another year of great play. But then what? And we're sort of stuck. Like, if you keep, I think it's more, I know Jack Duffin's out there saying they're not going to re-sign Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think it's a larger possibility than he does, simply because of all the things I've stated. 6th round pick, has done everything right. I think there's a part of the Browns that wants to reward him. He's a homegrown guy, and they want to keep those guys in the organization. Obviously, that's going to depend on price tag. What is he willing to take? What does he really want? And how important is it for him to stay here? That they may surprise you with another deal. They've done several of these where you're like, wow, that was less than I thought it would be. And you're sort of like, oh, really excited about it. So I'm curious to see where that goes. But ultimately, like, I'm with you. I think DPJ is the play. I think that's the one that makes the most sense. My feeling is the Browns are more than happy to let any football player or any media person talk about how much they would love to play in Cleveland. And they're just going to sit back there and go, we're not really interested. We're not going to tell you we're really interested because you're going to keep telling us how great it is to play in Cleveland. And we're going to let that happen as long as possible. And I think that's part of what Deshaun Watson is savvy enough to understand that talking up DeAndre Hopkins is good for him, which is good for the Browns, which ultimately is going to serve him beyond this year.
Yeah. And the last thing that I will say about this whole thing is, don't forget, DPJ is a guy that Andrew Berry and company drafted.
Yes.
And they've not really been quick to part ways with people that they've brought in and developed.
I'm going to do a head on that one pretty quick here, because now we're in year 4. They've got a whole lot of guys they've drafted, and some of them aren't going to make this team this year.
Yeah.
Which is going to be different, but like,
which obviously is different than like trading a guy away, though. You know,
right.
Like I feel like they've been pretty happy with DPJ. He stepped up when they've needed him to. I think he's obviously his rookie season, he had to play a pretty big role in the team, and he responded to it. And
that's funny because it's true and it's not. I think he had 14 catches as a rookie, but 3 of them were huge.
I was going to say he was able to make the plays. I mean, I call him Mr. Reliable. I know he had a couple of instances last year where he dropped the ball, but he typically is like very reliable. He's very, very smart. And he obviously was playing with a quarterback who had his own struggles and ups and downs. So he obviously had to work through that situation and obviously taking a bit of a step back with Amari Cooper joining the team last year. We didn't want him to have to be the number one wide receiver, right?
No.
He was never drafted to do that. So, I'm willing to take a gamble, if you will, and see how he does this year. Again, like they've added more talent, so we shouldn't have to rely on him like we feel like we have had in the past, which I think is good for him.
I know a lot of people are like hung up on the play he didn't make against the Bengals in the end zone. Overall, he kills the Bengals. Like just think in your head right now as you're listening to this, every big moment he's had in his career, the Bengals. The game-winning touchdown in 2020 as a rookie, the Bengals. Hurdling that dude on Halloween, the Bengals. Like he averages like something like 100 yards just against the Bengals. Even in the game, like he dropped the ball in the red zone. He had 111 yards in that game. Like he was like 8 for 12. He just produces at a really high level against that team. And I think part of the problem is because he doesn't say anything, we sort of like ignore the impact he really has. But to your point, yes, he like opening game of the season, Jacoby Brissett didn't really throw to him until he had to. And then it was the drive to sort of set up the game-winning field goal to get a couple of those big first downs or some of these other plays. But like he had 14 explosive plays. And I did the math on this. Like the relationship between explosive plays and touchdowns, because everybody wants more explosive plays because they lead to touchdowns. It's like 79% of the Browns touchdowns included at least one explosive play. That's not lost on the Browns. That's why they keep talking about that. They want guys that can do that. And the other part with DeAndre Hopkins, and it's not his fault per se, but it is the fact that like throughout his career and the time he was with Deshaun Watson and even this past season, he averages over 10 targets a game. Like that's a lot of passes. The Browns don't really have 10 targets to give him a game. Amari Cooper averaged less than 8 last year. And obviously some of that was because Jacoby Brissett's trying to, manage the offense and they're trying to run the ball more and the Browns are going to throw more. So Amari Cooper should get more targets. Like, yeah, I think when I did the math on this, like Donovan Peoples-Jones averaged 5.6 targets a game. That's like, it's low. It was too low based on what we've seen. So you've got those two. You've got David Njoku, who needs to get the ball. He should get the ball. You've got Elijah Moore. You made this trade for and have been featuring in OTAs. He's gotten more balls in OTAs than he did in his entire time with the Jets. He's a guy they believe that can create. To me, I've always looked at Kevin Stefanski's offense sort of like Bruce Lee, flow like water. You go where what the defense is going to give you. That's where they've been their most successful. They've just taken stuff that was there. And the 2020 Browns are the perfect example of that. No one goes into the game plan going, yeah, we got to really establish Rashard Higgins. But by virtue of the fact that just that's where the defense was allowing you to make plays, you let those guys make play. Get those guys the ball. And you compare that to when they had Beckham, and obviously some people are going to pull out, well, there's all these times he didn't throw the ball to Beckham. But like the first year, 2019, it was constantly forcing the ball to him, and they threw a lot of interceptions. He had 1,000 yards, but their record was mediocre, and there were just a lot of turnovers, and the whole thing was just awkward and clunky. Deshaun Watson's not Baker Mayfield. That's part of it, and some things will change. But ultimately, to me, I just want the offense to go to the guy who's open and the guy who's going to be in position to play. Are there going to be situations where you got to force the ball to your dudes? Absolutely. That's why you got them. That's why you're paying them the money. That's why you gave up the draft picks and all that. But ultimately, I just want the offense to go where it's going to go. And if you're just measuring it out, and I checked this, partly because Deshaun Watson runs with the ball, but the most pass attempts per game he's ever had in his career was 2020. It was 34. He threw 554 passes that year in an offense that didn't run the ball at all. But he scrambles himself. It's 34 balls. If that's what it is this year, you're going to have to figure out how all those balls going to go to the various guys between Cooper, between Njoku, between Elijah Moore, between DPJ. And Nick Chubb's going to catch more passes this year. And we talked about Marquise Goodwin. How many balls is he going to get? Jordan Akins is a guy who's going to get the ball a little bit. Like, I don't think the Browns want to put themselves in this situation. And Amari Cooper is not a guy who's going to complain out loud, but he is a guy who will sort of mention things behind the scenes that he'd like the ball a little more. I don't think they want to be in a situation where now they've got 4 guys yelling at them every week. that they're not getting the ball enough. Now, obviously, look, if they win, everybody's going to shut up and be like, okay, at least we're winning. But if they enter a snag or they have a stretch where it's not working, that's going to be an issue. So I think I understand why people get it, but I think ultimately what it boils down to is, one, normally Browns fans and media overrate the shit out of our players. Kareem Hunt's the ultimate example. Kareem Hunt, I still can't believe this was done, that somebody called Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt the second coming of Jim Brown and Ernie Davis, but it was done because Kareem Hunt couldn't play anymore. And we tend to overrate guys. We tend to think guys are superstars. I did it myself with Baker Mayfield. I thought don't get me wrong, he was great in 2020, but it didn't carry over from that. But we tend to overrate players. And then when we are hard on a player, we are overly hard on a player. And I think in some ways, DPJ has become a guy that either because we just don't pay enough attention to him or we're not really looking at what he does, we're sort of like, oh, he's not that good. He's not a game changer. And maybe he's not a game changer. He's not on Amari Cooper's level. But I don't think he has to be a super valuable player for the Browns. Ultimately, I would like to see DPJ get 2 more targets a game rather than DeAndre Hopkins getting 2 fewer targets a game. And because 7 games this past year, the Donovan Peoples-Jones had, I think, 4 targets or fewer. If that happens with DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to throw a gigantic hissy fit. It's going to be like Clowney was, where suddenly the team doesn't believe in me and the coach hates me and all this other stuff. Credit to Donovan Peoples-Jones. He probably should be angrier than he was last year for his lack of usage. So I think there's a lot of reasons that just sort of say, let's go with what we've got. And I think the Browns are counting on the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is ultimately going to price himself out of their range, and they don't have to ever say no. They can just be like, well, look, we tried, but he got too much money. We couldn't afford it, or it was too much for what we want to do and all that other stuff. So we'll see what happens. We'll flip on the podcast a week from now. I'll be dead wrong. DeAndre Hopkins will be here and DPJ will be with the Chiefs, and I'll hate everything because he'll crush it with Patrick Mahomes. But that's where I'm at this point.
I was going to say, we're going to record this and then tonight there's going to be a signing and he's going to land with this team. And we would have talked about this and it'll now be meaningless because that's what always happens, Pete.
Well, listen, I'm here for it if for the content of having to walk all these things back and talk myself into why DeAndre Hopkins is going to work. But
it is what it is.
That's my commitment to the audience. I can talk myself into. I'll still be. No, listen, I was insufferable with Jarvis Landry. If DeAndre Hopkins sucks with the Browns, get ready for it. But 3 days of minicamp, which should be entertaining. What is has your highlight clip experience been like for OTAs? Has it been everything you'd hoped it would be?
Oh, it's just everything that I could have imagined. No, I like the press conferences that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. I think we get some more relaxed content. We get to learn about players on a personal level. It makes me excited to root for some of these players as we embark on this training camp journey and the Hall of Fame game. And I think there are some exciting things too. I know that the star players aren't going to be playing in preseason games, but I think there's going to be a lot of guys that I'm going to have a rooting interest for and just seeing where they're going to end up landing or if they're going to make the roster. So I do enjoy it. Although I have to say, I haven't checked out really any of the Unleashed videos that the Browns have put out. I'm very, very much behind on that.
Siaki Ika's is hysterical because if you actually pay attention to the weights he's lifting, it's like high school weights. And I'm like, part of me is going, of course he's doing this. He's just doing this for the camera and showing he's working, but not really working. And then part of me is like, wait a minute. He can lift more than that, right?
So now you're concerned.
It's the stuff on his family is really interesting. He talked getting married and all this stuff. He's an interesting guy, but yeah, the workout stuff's painful. He at one point does plyo boxes, jumping. It's up to maybe his knee, and he's jumping all this. He's working his ass off, and you're sitting there going,
that feels like it's for the video then, the content. Yeah.
It better be. The one thing that I find entertaining, the media cannot get enough of Jim Schwartz. They yearn for Jim Schwartz press conference. I don't know about you, but the first time I saw him with the 51 shirt, I was hoping it was something related to the thyroid. That was what I was like. This is where my number's at. We're good. I'm in great shape. And then like he does this press conference, and it was really, don't get me wrong, he did some things that were really interesting in it, but ultimately he's like, he didn't say it this way, but he really was thinking this. I can't tell you shit until we get pads on. Like, and he's going to say that for until July when they have pads on. That I can't tell you really anything about how so-and-so is doing until his phrasing was, you have to be able to be physical. But yes, Jim Schwartz, they love.
That's what the fans want, Pete. That's what we want.
Yes. Jim Schwartz talking about his thyroid. I want an update. I want it now. I want to know he's in good shape. We're ready to go. But yeah, do us a favor. Review us, please. For one of the hosts' sake, please review us. Like, subscribe, share. Look, last week, YouTube, we had over 3,000 listens. That was great. Everybody's just dying for more Maddox, is my understanding. They just want more Maddox stories.
It's going to turn into just a parenting podcast. I'm down with that.
Well, I don't know how much parenting will be involved. It's just your kid talking shit.
Stories. Yes. Plenty more where that came from.
Maddox is a gift for intimidation. Anyway, yeah, so we'll be back next week, some form or fashion, once we've got mini camps underway. But other than that, yeah, thanks for listening and all that. We will be here next week.